house on the corner of Sparks Avenue and Spring Street, up on the hill, that's now a parking lot for Clark Memorial Hospital. And that house was called Innismur, from Murphy. So Murphy was their last name now. Well, Dennis died suddenly, broke her heart. She went to pieces. She had him buried in the front yard of that house, and this was the monument that she put over him. And she had a big portrait of Dennis, and it was covered with glass, and right above his part of his jacket, where you would put a flower, right over it, she had a hole drilled in the glass, and every day she put a fresh flower in his lapel. She flipped out. She couldn't work. And so she decided finally, after months and months of trying to pull herself together, that she would do the European tour. So she left for Europe. She stayed over there a long time. She came back, and in 5 years she decided it was time to open up her business again. So she was a survivor, but she never got over Dennis. And eventually she thought, this is sick. I'm, going to take the body out of the front yard and bury it in the cemetery. So he came over here, and she's buried here with him. So that's the symbolism of the tree. And it says on here, thanks be to God for such have been. That's the way she felt about Dennis. Behind you, you have a very exquisite little stone. It kind of looks like a temple. It's got all kinds of leaves and flowers. The ivy represents eternity. And that's just a nice stone. It looks like it's lost its urn off the top. A lot of those have fallen off. There's a real nice one over there that's kind of a different urn, like that one. Good deal. And over here lies Julia Ingram. You all stay in the shade, and I'll just talk to you there. Let's see, where is she? Oh, she was in the first graduating class of Jeffersonville High School in 1872. There were only 4 people in the class, and they were all women. So they wore expensive white gowns to the floor, and there was a picture of them in the evening news, but it's, so old that you can hardly tell the features on the faces. She decided she wanted to be a doctor in an age when women didn't do that. She went to medical school in Philadelphia because it was the only one that accepted women. The men there gave them a very rough time. They were condescending, they were nasty to them. And they were only allowed to treat other women and children. They weren't allowed to see men in the altogether. Dr. Ingram became one of the first women doctors to practice in Louisville. I think there was only one other before her, and it was 20 years or so before Dr. Ingram came on the scene, and she was a black woman. So Dr. Ingram was probably the second women doctor in Louisville. She advocated for the professional training of nurses, which before that time was not available to women because they wouldn't be accepted in the schools. She created the juvenile court system in Louisville, where she acted as an advocate for children and was one of the founders of Ormsby Village. She even adopted a child and raised her. Dr. Ingram died in 1933 in Louisville. So we have so many people on this side of the river that did something that made a difference in other people's lives. I mentioned in the beginning that there was a big uproar when there was an African-American woman who wanted to be buried in Walnut Ridge Cemetery, and just because her skin was a different color, So this is Section H behind us, and it has a lot of African-American burials in it, if you're interested in that. Now you know where the majority of them were, but now they're everywhere, so that's a good thing. All right, now let's see what we're doing. Right across here is, don't move, stay in the shade. Guess which stone in Walnut Ridge Cemetery up to 1885 was the most expensive stone? Let me see. Who knows that?
How about James Reed?
All right, James G. Reed. That stone cost $3,000 in 1885. That was a fortune. James G. Reed came here. He was born in Kentucky in 1793, and he was in Indiana by 1816, but not at Jeffersonville. He was elsewhere. He ran for governor when he was very young, but he lost. And he represented Clark County in the state legislature, and he made $7 to $8 million for the state of Indiana because he had foresight. He foresaw the onset of railroads And Indiana had that much in money in canal stocks. And he knew that when railroads came, canal stock would become worthless, so he unloaded it for the state and made all that money for the state. He was a prescient person. He was against the state owning businesses, and he thought that private enterprise should control America's industries. Anybody know which monument was the most expensive one? That one. Right next to it is his daughter, Sarah Reed Ransom. She's in the fancy little sarcophagus, or whatever you call that thing, with the tape on top. And her husband is right next to her. She was the daughter of James. She married 3 times and had no children. In her day, she was the wealthiest woman in Jeff. After the death of her husband, Hyatt Ransom, she lived in the Reed Mansion on Riverside Drive. You know which one that is? It's the one that looks like Halloween at Riverside and Mulberry, that's got the turret and all that kind of stuff. Well, that was the old Reed Mansion. She had a servant named Nellie Kelly, I swear. Nellie's husband drank, and he was frequently in jail, and they were poor people. When her husband was in jail, Nellie would go there and get his shoes so she could wear them to work at the Reed Mansion. Well, when she wore them, they made this loud clunking noise on the floor because they were too big. They weren't even the right size for Nellie. So one evening, when important guests were coming to dinner at the Reed Mansion, Mrs. Ransom called a neighbor girl over and said, "Go and get Nellie and tell her we need her tonight. Tell her not to wear her husband's shoes."
Oh.
And that little girl is the person that told me that story, Edna Graniger. Yep.